Hello, everybody. My name is Alvin Tenoso, and today we will be presenting on Chapter 9, where we talk about financial reporting for state and local governments. And this presentation is done by myself, Alvin Tenoso, along with Caitlin Villa and Ilaria Williams Duenas. To start things off, I will be talking about the different government reporting entities. Following along will be Caitlin, who will be talking about the component units. And to conclude, Ilaria will be talking about the various government financial reports. So, to begin talking about government entities, the average citizen would have little knowledge as to the various entities that the government may have. An example of this would be the independent special districts. Now, these independent special districts are created to finance services demanded by residents. Examples of these are conservation districts or memorial districts, and they are entities that are separate, and normally they would be carried out by boards and agencies that are not independent from the government. However, they do have some degree of fiscal and administrative dependence, meaning that they would have authority for certain things regarding their district. And when we talk about financial reporting entities encompass the primary government and the organizations and where they are financially accountable of. Now, some examples of these entities could be the primary government, which consists of the state and the local government. There's also the legally separate organization, which are organizations that has their own identities and they have their own specific distinctions in comparison to other organizations. And there's also fiscally independent organizations, which are organizations that can determine their own budgets, set their own rates and charges, and issue bond and debt without the authority or without confirmation from the government. So, in order for the government to be financially accountable for these organizations, the government must be able to appoint a voting majority on the organization's governing board, and they must pass the financial accountability test, which has 3 criteria. The first criteria is whether the government will be able to impose their own will on the organization and have significant influence on the organization's programs, projects, and activities. And they also are able to have authority over doing things such as removing certain board members or modifying the budgets when necessary. A second criteria is if the organization has the potential of financially benefiting or burdening the government. And in this case, this is where the government would be entitled to the organization's resources, and they would legally assume the financial obligations, their debt, and whether they would assume providing financial support to that organization. And for the last criteria, it is whether the organization is fiscally dependent on the government, and this is when they lack authority to do things such as determining their own budget, levy taxes, or setting rates or changes, and issuing bonded debt without government approval. And when they qualify under these 3 criteria, then the government will be financially accountable for these organizations. Now I will pass it on to Kate, who will be talking about component units.
Hello everyone, I'm Caitlin and I'll be presenting on component units, which are defined as legally separate organizations for which the elected officials of the primary government are financially accountable. It can also be another organization that is significant to the primary government, that if they were to exclude it from the reporting entity's financial statements, it would make the statements misleading and it wouldn't be an accurate representation of the entity. Some examples of component units are not-for-profit organizations, for-profit firms, and non-primary governments. An organization should be reported as a component unit if all of the following criteria are met. So 1, the assets received or held by the component unit are entirely or almost entirely for the direct benefit of the primary government. 2, the primary government or its component units is entitled to a majority of the assets received or held by the component unit. And 3, the assets received or held are significant to the primary government. Typically, a professional judgment is required to make this determination of whether or not it's a component unit. But to assist in this decision, GASB has developed a flowchart shown on the right side of the screen. Illustration 9-1, which shows the decision process for the inclusion or exclusion of a potential component unit. There are abbreviations, so PCU is the potential component unit, PG stands for the primary government, and CU is the component unit. The chart starts with the question, is the potential component unit legally separate? Yes or no, and then it flows to several end results depending on its characteristics. As for how these component units are reported, there are 2 ways it can be presented on the financial statements. GASB indicates that generally the component unit financial information is presented separately from the primary government's, which is known as the discrete presentation, where there are 1 or more columns about the component unit's financial information. GASB also requires that any major component units be presented, and some considerations when determining if the component unit is major is the significance of transactions between the component unit and the primary government, the financial benefit or burden, and the importance of the component unit's services to the citizens. The next type of presentation is blended, and under this method, the component unit data is combined with the appropriate fund types and activities of the primary government. And also, since the primary government only reports 1 general fund, the general fund of the component unit would be considered as a special revenue fund. Here on the right side of the screen is GovGuam's financial statement, their statement of net position of their component units. As you can see, their component units are listed in each column and are the Guam Airport Authority, Guam Housing, GMH, GPA, GWA, Port Authority of Guam, and UOG. These component units are discretely presented, as you can see, since they're all listed separately instead of combined as it would be in a blended presentation. Now I'll be passing it on to Ilaria to discuss the government financial reports.
Howdy, my name is Ilaria Duenas, and I'll be going into government financial reports, which helps to describe Learning Objective 9.3, identify and describe contents of various government financial reports. So first, for interim financial reports, these should be prepared and distributed at regular periods throughout a fiscal period. This is generally monthly, but smaller governments with less financial activity may find that bi-monthly and quarterly periods are more satisfactory. However, partial interim reports with considerable current importance should be prepared and distributed as frequently as possible. Government administrators have the greatest need for these interim reports. However, members of a legislative branch, especially those in the Finance Committee, may find these reports to be very useful. We also have listed here some of the minimum useful information used for budgetary and cash management purposes. The first 2 being the schedule of actual and budgeted revenue and the schedule of actual and budgeted expenditures. These are for the general fund, special revenue funds, and other funds for which budgets have been legally adopted. Next, we have the comparative schedule of revenues and expenditures. This is for each enterprise and internal service fund. Next, we have the combined schedule of cash receipts, disbursements, and balances for all funds. And lastly, we have the forecast of cash positions for all funds. Next, we have annual financial reports. So for the government of Guam, we were looking at the ACFR in the year ended 2021. The annual financial reports consist of 3 different sections: the introductory section, the financial section, and the statistical section. For the introductory section, this contains a table of contents, a letter of transmittal which cites legal policies and requirements for the report, and any material deemed appropriate by management. This should not duplicate matters in the MD&A because this is going to be more in depth in the financial section. Also, we use CAFR, or now referred to as ACFR, for this annual financial report because it goes beyond the minimum requirements for external reporting. And here on the right-hand side, I have included a little diagram I have found in the introductory section. This is just an organizational chart of the government, and it describes different positions of different departments, with the head being the Magahaga, which is Governor Lulian Guerrero. Next, we have the financial section of the annual financial report. This section should contain sufficient information to disclose fully and present fairly the financial position and results of financial operations during the fiscal year. Some minimum content that's required under Section 2200 of the GASB codification includes, first, the auditor's report. So for the government of Guam's ACFR in the year ended September 30th, 2021, it was audited by the company Deloitte. They gave a little statement and signed it at the bottom. The next section is the MD&A, which is the Management Discussion and Analysis section. Out of all of ACFR's contents, this was definitely my most favorite section. It was pretty lengthy, but it gave a really great narrative and visual explanation of ACFR's contents, especially with the financial section. I've actually included 3 different graphs that I found in this section here. At the top, we have graph number 5. This is like a deconstructed pie chart describing the government activities and their costs. As you can see, the largest slice goes to public health at 24%. Next, we have graph number 1 here on the left-hand side. This just gives the fund balance and deficit for the end of the year, but it describes 10 different years. So you can not only see 2021, but you can see the years prior and the trends of going up and down. And lastly, we have graph number 2 here, which is describing the general fund, the budgeted versus actual revenues, including other financing sources. So as you can see here, we can see the different numbers and the trends from fiscal year 2013 to fiscal year 2021. Next, we have some basic financial statements. We've gone over this in the past, but just for a little refresher, we have the government-wide and the fund financial statements for this section. For the government-wide financial statement, this includes a statement of net position and a statement of activities. For the fund financial statements, we have the governmental funds, which include a balance sheet, a statement of revenue, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. For proprietary funds, we have a statement of net position, a statement of cash flows, and a statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. And then we have the fiduciary funds, which include a statement of fiduciary net position and a statement of changes in fiduciary net position. The next content required is the required supplementary information other than the MD&A, but not limited to budgetary comparison schedules. And lastly, we have the combining statements and individual fund statements and schedules. All right, so last but not least, we have the statistical section of the annual financial report. This should reflect the social and economic data, financial trends, and the fiscal capacity of the government. Now, in order to be the most useful, the 10 most recent years of data should be included or at least indicated in this section. So as you can see here, I've included the government of Guam's net position of primary government within the last 10 years. So you can see this data and how it changes from 2012 to 2021. And then we also have the data displayed in a graph up here at the top. As you can see here, this graph is very simple. The statistical section includes a lot of very simple and easy to understand graphs and data, just because this is for everyday users of the government to understand. GASB also defines 5 different categories of information that should be included in this section. This includes financial trends information, which describes how a financial position has changed over time. Then we have the revenue capacity information, which discusses how a government has its ability to generate its own revenues. This can be through property taxes or through user charges. Then we have the debt capacity information, which assesses how a government has its existing debt burden and their ability to issue additional debt. Then we have the demographic and economic information, which helps to understand the socioeconomic environment that the government operates over time. And lastly, we have the operating information, which just provides more context on how a government operates its resources and how that can be better understood to its users. I would also like to add that I am looking at the ACFR in the year ended 2021 for these 3 different sections. I believe that Caitlin was looking at the government-wide statements in the year ended 2022 because that was the most recent information that she could find. If you guys have not already checked out the Guam's ACFR, I highly recommend that you do. It was a very interesting thing to look over. I really liked how each section, the introductory, financial, and statistical, in the beginning of it, it included a unique legend to Guam, which I found very interesting and just like a nice little touch to the report. All right, thank you so much everybody for reaching up to this point. This concludes our presentation for today on Chapter 9. If you guys do have any questions, concerns, or you need a little bit more clarification on this chapter, please feel free to reach out to me, Caitlin, or Albin, and we would love to help you guys out. All right, thank you guys once again and have a great day.